Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. President Obama will soon make a decision that will chart the course for America's involvement in Afghanistan for years to come. I personally am not upset that it has taken President Obama this long to determine his response to General McChrystal's request for an additional 35,000 U.S. combat troops to be sent to Afghanistan. This is a monumental decision, and it comes when the radical Islamic Taliban and Al-Qaeda movements seem to be gaining momentum. It also comes when our troops throughout the world are stretched to the breaking point and when our economy is frayed. It comes when the debt that America is piling up is not just alarming, but suicidal. This is not the time for business as usual, nor is it the time for brash decision-making. A decision to send U.S. troops to Afghanistan will cost money, lots of it, and it will cost lives. In the past, powerful nations were humbled in the rugged terrain of that desolate country. Yes, a desolate country, dotted by thousands of small villages, populated by tribal people, so independent and so ferocious that they have never been conquered. Throughout history, attempts to conquer Afghanistan has met with bloody failure. War there is not defeating an enemy. It is conquering a people, and these people have never been conquered. British writer Rudyard Kipling once wrote, and I quote, "When you lie wounded on the Afghan plain and the women are coming to cut the remains, roll to your right and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier." The British Army dominated vast expanses of India for 2 centuries, but it was never able to subdue the Afghans. Thousands of British troops lost their lives trying to do just that. In 1842, a British force of 16,000 withdrew from their fortress in Kabul. That force was then beset upon by Afghan tribesmen who cut them to pieces. Only one member of the original contingent of 16,000 made it to the city of Jalalabad. That one person who survived was the regimental surgeon, Dr. W. Broyden. It was thought that perhaps he was permitted to survive. Russia, too, has had its comeuppance in the hostile Afghan countryside. It was one of the Soviet Union's most telling chapters, and it was also one of the Soviet Union's last chapters. After America's inglorious conclusion of its military operations in Vietnam, our Soviet global adversary was emboldened. Then, with the fall of the Shah of Iran, a power vacuum was created that the Soviets hoped to fill. They were then engaged in a post-Vietnam War offensive throughout the world. So, when chaos and volatility erupted in Afghanistan as a result of a blood rift between 2 Afghan communist factions, Soviet leaders sent in the Red Army. They did that to unify the communist factions and to pacify the countryside in Afghanistan, which was already hostile to the communist ideology and very hostile to foreign troops. Perhaps as a payback for the massive Soviet aid provided the North during our conflict in Vietnam, or perhaps just as a means of weakening the Soviet global military power. During Ronald Reagan's administration, during his presidency, our government provided weapons and other support for the Afghan insurgent forces who were battling Soviet occupation troops. As compared with other 20th century presidents, Reagan rarely depended on a policy of deploying U.S. troops to solve problems and to combat enemies. I know that goes against what a lot of people think about Ronald Reagan. U.S. forces were under Ronald Reagan, yes, were sent in to the small island nation of Grenada, which was in the throes of a Marxist military clique's murderous rampage. Grenada was a limited operation, but it was significant because it proved America was willing to use its military force after suffering a demoralizing national malaise, which is best remembered in history as the Vietnam Syndrome. Another deployment President Reagan agreed to make was sending Marines into Lebanon, which resulted in a catastrophic attack on our Marines, which left 290 of them dead and many others severely injured. After that, Reagan was reluctant to deploy our troops, and during his administration, if you take a look at the records, he deployed troops into combat many fewer times than most other presidents during the last century. Yet, he's portrayed as a cold warrior and is branded and was branded then by the liberal left as a warmonger. Yet he deployed our troops fewer times than most other American presidents. Yes, Ronald Reagan, more than any other leader, was one who we should basically praise for the defeat of Soviet communism. That enemy threatened our security and the freedom of our people and the freedom of people throughout the world. Yet he did not send our troops into hostile action after the Beirut debacle murdered so many, resulted in the death of so many of our Marines. Well, if he didn't send in our troops to various places, how then was our country so well defended during that time, and how was the evil power of Soviet communism defeated? Well, what the answer is, it is what is called the Reagan Doctrine. This strategy was based on the concept of helping others fight their battles when their foe was our foe. Rather than sending U.S. troops into Central America, for example, when the Soviets armed its stooges, in fact, their stooges were in the process of establishing a Marxist dictatorship in Nicaragua, and the Soviet Union sent $1.5 billion worth of military equipment to back up that Marxist regime. No, Reagan didn't send U.S. troops down there to fight the Sandinistas. He armed those Nicaraguans who were resisting the regime, the so-called Contras. In Africa, America helped arm Jonas Savimbi and his UNITA group as they fought a Soviet-backed regime in Angola. And neither of these two groups were perfect. They had many imperfections. These were flawed allies, but they were fighting for their own country, and they were fighting their own countrymen. We did not rely on sending in U.S. troops. We supported those people locally who were fighting their adversary as long as their adversary was our adversary as well. And of course, most importantly, we armed and we supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who directly took on the military might of the Soviet Union. Again, many of the Mujahideen were people who were totally inconsistent with our outlook and our views on respect and of freedom and individual rights. Many of them were, by the way, very, very supportive of treating people decently, and were not radical Muslims in that regard. But there were flawed people who we supported to fight the Soviet Union. We brought down. That's how the Soviet Union was brought down. Not by sending in U.S. troops, but not trying to be perfectionists in who we would then support, but to try to defeat our primary enemy. During those years, I worked in the Reagan White House as a senior speechwriter, and yes, as a special assistant to President Reagan. I worked with a small cadre of patriots who made the Reagan Doctrine real. In fact, the speechwriting department is actually given credit by many to actually have developed that doctrine and made it into a doctrine rather than a loose strategy.